I mentioned earlier that everybody had an opportunity to share the love of God. One day this week, Lisa says, you know what, I'm hungry, which she has not been hungry since her surgery. And she says, I want to go out to eat. I want to take my first ride in public, and I want to see if I can walk more than just around the house. So I asked her where she wanted to go. She told me. I said, let's go. So we went for lunch, and the place wasn't busy. And so Lisa ordered, I ordered, and over the week I heard a bad dad joke. And the bad dad joke was...
Is there such thing as bad dad joke?
Oh, this one is.
What makes them so good?
I went to the waitress and I said, how do you find Will Smith in a snowstorm? And the people at the table across the aisle went, oh, you're not going there. Well, the answer is you look for the Fresh Prince.
Yeah.
Yeah, his first role was the Fresh Prince. Okay? So, but the people at the other table, it was two people, and they were in their conversation. And we were eating, but they were talking rather loud. Have you ever sat next to somebody you wanted to mind your own business, but they talked loud enough that you couldn't just mind your own business? Well, that's what happened. So one of the people went away, and the younger of the two were there, and they'd been talking about relational things, and it was a young person. I said, you know, before you do this, I said, I used to be a youth pastor. I'm giving full disclosure. But I used to tell my teens, before you should date, you need to know who you are. You need to know your good points and your bad points, because then if you know who you are and what you bring to the table and what you don't bring to the table, you can find somebody who matches and is your opposite. Your strengths are their weaknesses, and your weaknesses are their strengths. And it's like the rocks, it's like the teeth of a deer. And the young lady looked at me and goes, well, thank you, random restaurant name guy. I said, you're very welcome. I said, I'm just, I heard what you were saying, and I tell that to everybody because it makes sense. Well, when the person she was talking to, I believe it was probably a mentor, sat down, she goes, random such and such guy just gave me some really good advice. And she shared it with the lady. And the lady goes, well, I've been married for 25 years to my husband. I looked at her and I said, well, we've been married 32. Right? But I gave her a church card. She goes, I said, now it's not just random restaurant name guy. Right? That's all it took. Now, I have no idea. She may be listening. I don't know. But see, if we do that, we have to overcome our fear. Last week, Joshua was told, be strong and courageous. 3 different times in the beginning of the book of Joshua, he's told, be strong and courageous, because I, the Lord, will protect you. He's still on the far side of the promised land. They haven't crossed over yet. When they do cross over, I told you last week, we'd be talking about the city of Jericho. How many of you remember that I mentioned it? The city of Jericho was one of the premier cities in that part of God's country. The country that God was giving to his people, that was one of the premier cities. The walls of the building are so thick that people lived in the walls. Has anybody ever been to London? Anybody here? You have, Brian?
Yeah.
Did you ever go to the Tower?
Yep.
The Tower of London, where they keep the crown jewels?
Yep. No cameras, and you're on the treadmill.
Yeah. And it was so neat. I went there when I was in college and spent my time. And one thing you don't understand and you don't recognize is that the walls of medieval castles were built on the walls of biblical castles. And when I say that, they start wide and go up narrow, especially on the front edge. It's straight on one side and built like that. And what happens is, the reason they do that is so that if it hits the front side where the invaders are coming, it bounces off. But the back side is sloped because the thicker it is, the harder it is to break through. The Tower of London in England and the castle that surrounds it actually is wide enough at the bottom that people live in the wall. it actually has enough room that people have living room, dining room, bedrooms, kitchens, bathrooms in the wall. In biblical day, in Jericho, same thing happened. The walls were so big that people lived in the wall, which means that the wall at the bottom was at least as big as this room. Okay? For those of you who've never been to our building, it's about 50 foot or about 40 foot wide. And it would taper up to about 12 to 15 foot at the top, because then you could stand on top of it and throw things down on people who were trying to get in. So they send 2 spies in. And the spies walk around Jericho, and the king finds out. He seals the city and wants to capture them. Because he sees 1.5 million people just across the river. It's not a surprise. And there's a lady named Rahab. She's a prostitute. Her job is to make money by soliciting with men and hanging out and being a consort. And these guys go to her because it doesn't look unusual. Not a very Christian pursuit, but we're in the pre-Christian days. We're in the God days. And Rahab hides them and says, I'm going to hide you provided you save my family. I know that God's taken over this town. You protect me and mine. Totally selfish reason, isn't it? And they said, okay, you hide us, you get us out of town, and you take this red cord that you lower us down on, and you put that in your window, and everything around your window we won't touch. But if your family goes out of the house, it's on them. You ever tell somebody that? I'm giving you good advice, but if you do it your way, you're on your own. You ever said that to somebody? I bet I have. This is the way I recommend you do it. You can do it other ways, but then you're on your own. Well, here's what happened. Before the battle starts, we've all heard it. Joshua, the battle of Jericho, Jericho, Jericho. We've all heard that, right? Yep. And the walls came tumbling down. Oh, okay. But the truth is there was a lot more preparation than that. They hadn't crossed the river yet. It takes a lot to cross 1 million plus people across the river, but they didn't all go. Only the army went. The women and children could stay on the back. The livestock could stay on the back. Part of the other tribes could stay on the back, but they had to fight. All the fighting men had to come over. It still takes a lot of time. The other thing was that the men of Israel who had been born in the desert had never been circumcised as God's people. So they had to make flint knives, and they had to circumcise the entire army. Not a pleasant situation. See, we don't like to talk about that. We like to talk about the hero things. We don't always talk about what work it takes to get there. See, the act of circumcision was a way that God said, these are my people. It was also an act of submission to God that was not fun or easy. How many of you know being Christian isn't all unicorns and rainbows? Okay? If it is, you're not doing it right. I used to have a coach who used to say, if it doesn't hurt, you're not working it right. Okay, I never worked it right. I admit it. But being God's people isn't always the easiest path. And it's not supposed to be. So they do the circumcision. 3 days later they cross. By then, most of it has scarred over and they're not hurting the initial hurt. They're purified. They've been praying to God. And now God says, here's the plan. You're going to take the priest at the front. They're going to carry the ark. Okay? They're going to carry the presence of God with them. They're going to have horns. And each day, for 6 days, you're going to walk around the city so that everybody standing on top of the city can see you. It says that the city of Jericho is tied up tight. Chapter 6 of Joshua. Now, Jericho was tightly shut up because of the Israelites. Because the Israelites were there and everybody was already scared to death of them, the city shut up. Nobody comes in, nobody goes out. It's tighter sealed than coronavirus. Think about it. Do you know in areas where the coronavirus is, they are sealing off entire cities. They have armed guards around the cities. Nobody's allowed to come in or out. Makes it real hard to get supplies. Then the Lord, verse 2 of chapter 6, then the Lord said to Joshua, see, I've delivered Jericho into your hands, along with its king and its fighting men. And then he tells him the most bizarre plan to win. Verse 3, march around the city once with all the armed men. Do this for 6 days. Have 7 priests carry trumpets of the ram's horn in front of the ark. On the 7th day, march around the city 7 times with the priests blowing their trumpets. And when you hear them sound a long blast on the trumpets, have all the people give a shout. Then the wall of the city will collapse, and the people will go up, every man straight in. The city is going to collapse in such a way that every man who's been walking this way and shouts for God and for Israel turns, and they can walk right into the middle of town. How many of you think that's a good plan? Think about it for a minute. The walls are as thick as a house. Not a house's walls, the entire house. And without a siege machine, without a ramp, without so much as a rock being thrown at the place, this wall big enough to house people is going to collapse so flat that you can just walk in. In humanity, that doesn't sound like much of a plan. That's a fool's errand. If you think about it, it makes no sense. And yet, if God says to do it, what should you do?
Do it.
But they all had a choice. See, the people of Jericho, while they were sealed in, it didn't mean they couldn't see them, hear them, and know they were there. And the people of Israel are down here, and the people of Jericho are up here at the top of the wall. And it doesn't mean that they couldn't have problems, even with God's fear in them. But they took their faith, as little as it was. As little as it was. I'm going to tell you right now, if I'd been one of those soldiers, I would have gone, I don't think so. That makes no sense. Walk around the building. Let's be fair here. Let's take all of us. Let's every day for the next 6 days and walk around this building. And on the last day, let's jump up and down as hard as we can and scream as loud as we can. And what do you think is going to happen to the building? Nothing. You might scare the birds on the steeple. You might scare the deer in the woods behind it.
You might scare the neighbors.
The neighbors aren't even going to worry about it. Like, what are these crazy Christians doing over there? But that's what they did. They followed God's letter to the letter. Can you imagine what it must have been like on the first day? A couple 100,000 soldiers around the building. And the people inside are waiting for something to happen. And they get all the way around the building, and then they go, bye. And they go back to their camp. And day 2, you get where I'm going with this?
Yes.
And on day 3, and on day 4, and the people inside are going, what are they thinking? Is this any way to run a siege? You walk around the building, go hi, bye, and leave. You could have phoned it in. On day 7. Hey, they brought a band this time.
And the earthquake hit in one wall down.
Now they did it once. They did it twice. Why is today different? 3 times, 4 times. The people on the wall are going, what the heck? They think this is going to do something? And then there's a loud blast. And the building collapses. The wall, the house, everything collapses. And there's nowhere to hide. accept. How many of you remember the game of musical chairs? If you had 10 people playing, you put out 9 chairs. Music stops, everybody scrambles, right? Person who doesn't get a seat gets out of the game. Pastor, where does musical chairs have to do with this game? Easy. One piece of the wall didn't fall. Did it? See, one piece of the wall that had a window had this red rope wrapped around it on the outside. And the whole wall came down, except for this one house wide. And everybody started going in, and the whole of Israel's army went, wait a minute, can't do that one. We'll go around it. But Rahab had to do a job too. God told the Israelites to keep their promise. Rahab kept her promise, but Rahab also had to remember to protect her family. Nobody could go out. When everybody else is looking on the wall and everybody else is going, wow, look at these crazy people. One each day they're walking around doing nothing. She had to say, hey, guys, stay away from the window. Don't go out the door. We had the food. See, she was making preparation during that time, too. She was kept putting food in the house. And what happened? The wall comes down, and by the way, there was one more rule. Every inhabitant, 2-legged, 4-legged, winged, everything, had to die. No exceptions.
She was the exception.
Only the people in Rahab's house, exactly. But everybody else had to die. See, we think that, and we talk about a loving God, and yet look how many people died. All of them weren't combatants. All of them weren't adults. All of them weren't evil. I'd hate to think what would happen if they decided that that had to happen here right now. Because I got a grandson there. I got a couple of little kids in this children's church room, and their teachers. I want you to think about this for a minute. How could God do that? See, we don't think about all these different things, but the truth is, God was sending a message to a lot of people. One, to the Israelites. You can trust me. 2, to the people of Jericho and the people of the Promised Land. Get out of town, ahead of my people. I promised the land to them, not to you. But also to the people of Jericho. Because Rahab's family were the down and outers. They were the scum. They were the human traffickers. And yet God said, I'm going to make an example. They protected my values and my people. I will protect them. Now, how many of you, good Christian folk, how many of you would have anything to do with a prostitute? Think about it for a minute. See, in our Christian lives, we say, oh no, they're dirty people. But don't they need to be saved?
Sure.
Don't they deserve to be saved? You good Christian folk? How many of you wouldn't hang out near a drug dealer? But they need to be saved. See, Jesus, God was making a message that even in the evil of the city, a city that I am going to destroy, lock, stock, and barrel. If somebody has an inkling about me, I'll protect them. I'll protect them. Rahab made one good decision in her life, and that's to hide 2 guys on a rooftop. But it was also to put that rope out around the window, wasn't it?
Yep.
See, the Bible doesn't say if any of her relatives said, nah, I'm not going in the wall. I'm not going in your house. It doesn't say that any of her family said, hey, it's day 5, nothing's going on, I'm going back to my house. It doesn't talk about that. In fact, it does say that her and her household were saved. Why? Because her household was right in that square. Most unusual. God picks unusual people to do miracles. Think about it for a minute. How many of you look back at your day and you recognize what you were before Christian, and now you look at yourself and you go, why? Why did God pick me? Any of you ever think about that?
Every day.
I think about it. I sit back and I still sit back and go, God, why did you call me to be a pastor? Something's wrong with this picture. It doesn't line up. Even after 20 years, it doesn't line up. I still know a lot of people who do a better job than I do. God says, deal with it. I chose you. And if I choose you, I equip you. And he said to every human being who is a Christian, I have called you to be my witnesses. Jumping forward to verse 15. On the seventh day, they got up at daybreak. They marched around the city 7 times in the same manner, except that on the day they circled the city 7 times. The 7th time around, when the priest sounded the trumpet's blast, Joshua commanded the people, shout, for the Lord has given you the city. The city and all that is in it are to be devoted to the Lord. Only Rahab the prostitute and all who are in her house shall be spared, because she hid the spies. And then it says, keep away from the devoted things. This was one of the things that beat the war. See, in the war back in those days, it was winner take all. How many of you ever played a game winner take all? Doesn't matter how many's there. One guy wins, everybody else walks away with nothing. That's how the game is played. See, in biblical day, if you won the war, you got to take their stuff. And they had stuff. How many of you know that in the poorest city, there's gold? In the poorest city, there's food. In the poorest city, there's livestock. In the poorest city, there's fine clothing. How many of you know that spoils go to the winner? That's how the game was played.
Unless God says stop.
God says don't do it. Not only did he say kill everybody, he said burn everything.
Yep.
Don't take anything. Wait a minute. Part of my soldier's salary is that I get to keep what I grab. After the fight's over, I grab what I want. You get to keep it. That's how the game is played, God. See, God doesn't always play by man's rules. In fact, most times God doesn't play by man's rules. God makes the rules. Long story short, not only did they win the battle, guess how many casualties they had? What would be a fair casualty taking over a city?
Without oversight, none.
Several hundred, but none is the answer.
What'd you say, John?
Several hundred, but none's the answer.
The normal answer would be several hundred. A couple thousand. Acceptable risk. But when God's involved, the answer was 0. 0. That's not practical either. In war, people get hurt. In God, people get spared. How do we apply this today? I look across the room, and I have no idea who's watching us on YouTube, but I look across the room, none of us looks like we're getting ready to go to war. Okay? No, Harry, today you don't look like, I know you're in the military, but you're in your cities, man. I'm sorry.
That's fine. I'm good for that.
But here's what I want us to understand. We are at war. Hello? We aren't at physical war, but how many of you know that you have neighbors who are going to die and go to hell forever if they die today? How many of you know that you have co-workers that are going to die and go to hell forever if the Lord comes back today?
Family members.
How many? I was headed there. I was trying to work my way closer here. Okay? So you don't get to pick your neighbors. You don't get to pick your family members. But how many of you know that there's family members who might not make heaven? you don't do your job. See, the first thing to do the job is sanctify yourself. In the Nazarene church, we like to talk about sanctification, second work of grace.
Amen.
Here's the thing about it. Before you can do the second work of grace, you got to do the first work of grace. That's salvation. You've got to get squared with God first. They had to get squared with God first. And it was painful. It was called circumcision. It was called following God's rules. It was called not doing it the way humans do it, but trusting God. Then came the sanctification. God, I'll do it your way. It was making a conscious commitment to step out of ourselves and do it God's way. How many of you like doing it God's way? See, we talk about it, but the truth is when push comes to shove, some of us kind of like to do our own thing. Well, and I could hear the generals. I could hear some of the commanders. I could hear some of the people with the big spears going, this is no way to fight a battle. We need to go in because I love the smell of napalm in the morning. Right?
Good morning, Vietnam.
And they're going, no, we just walk around the building and quietly wave at them as we leave each day for 6 days. But that's not the way to win a battle. They're going to laugh at us. They're going to throw stuff at us. And you know what? As Christians, we have that same fear. I can't pray for the people I live near. Why? Because they'll make fun of me. They'll call me Jesus freak. So did Toby Mac 25 years ago. No big deal. By the way, that was a common sense reference. When DC Talk was still around, Toby Mac was their fake front man, and they did a song called Jesus Freak, okay? For those of you who are into the Christian music scene. But what happens is, we will have a million reasons not to pray for people. We'll have a million and one reasons not to listen to what God tells us, and there's only one reason to do it, because God said so. And we'll have 500,000 reasons to not act when He tells us what to do, because we have a better plan. One of the best billboards I ever saw. Went past this church, and it was up for a month. Every time I went past it, I loved it. It said, do you want to make God laugh? Sometimes it said laugh, other times it said smile. Do you want to make God smile?
Tell them your plan.
Show Him your plans. Here's what I want us to understand. If we are doing things God says to do God's way, it has no choice but to be excited. It has no choice but to be workable. It has no choice but to occur.
Amen.
Even if it seems implausible. Even if it's an impossible victory. There is no human way that walking around a city that had walls thick enough that people could live in them, there is no way that walking around it a total of, 13 times, should cause total collapse. There is no reason that even walking around 13 times and 7 guys blowing ram's horns. Have you ever heard a guy blow a ram's horn? I shouldn't say this because they're my Christian brothers, but it is an awful noise. But like 100 times louder. And there's no tune on it. It's not like you can get different notes, so it's just this Johnny one-note thing. I can only imagine. 7 of them is an awful racket. But it shouldn't cause a wall to fall down. You know what? Us praying that God shows us somebody shouldn't change a heart. Us listening to God when He tells us who it is won't change a heart. Us acting on what God says releases God's power to change a heart. And then there's that last step. See, once that wall came down, the Israelites still had to do what God said. They had to go in and they had to kill everybody and everything. Not one sheep got away alive. Not one critter. Even the little lamb with the big cute eyes.
Not one child.
That's true. And that's harsh. And sometimes we look at it and we go, but God, we can't have somebody may get mad at us. And a person say to me, Pastor, you can't preach like that because somebody in the church might get angry and leave. And I believed him in my early preaching career. And all of a sudden, the Lord said to me, he said, if I give you the message, what's your job, boy? And I went, to tell your message. He says, and if it doesn't work, and if people get angry at it, who are they getting angry at? Well, me. He goes, don't be stupid. If you're just repeating what I tell you, they're not mad at you. You're the face. You're the one who gets hollered at, but they're not mad at you. Trust me. How many of you know that truth is always truth? I'm going to say one more thing, which is going to rankle some people here. So if your toes get easily stepped on, pick your feet up, okay? How many of you know there's only one truth?
Amen.
There is objective truth, not subjective. Oprah Winfrey telling 1 billion people, follow your truth. There is no your truth. There's only the truth.
That's right.
Okay.
Because what happens when your truth butts up against my truth? Who wins? Well, in the world today, it becomes, you're a hater. You're a meanie. You've got to see it my way. Why? You disagree with me as much as I disagree with you. Who's the hater here? But there's always that nurturing thing. Plan. Pray, listen, act, nurture. Where was the nurture? The wall came down. Rahab did her part. God did his part. The people of Israel did their part. Nobody in that house got hurt. And when it was all done, Rahab looked around and went, my business is ruined. All my clients are gone. All my income is gone. What does my family do now? Now I want you to think about that for a minute. That's a real situation. People who come into the cross and people who are coming into Christ, they are afraid of what's going to happen next. Is that fair?
Yeah.
And the people of Israel said, Rahab, you're not part of our people. But because you were fair to God, and you helped God's people, and we saved your family, join us. See, it says Rahab's family was gathered into the family of God. They're not Israelites. They're not the chosen family of God, but they were included in it. Why? Because a couple thousand years later, Jesus was going to die on a cross to take all the non-Jewish people and include them in the family. And 2,000 years after that, in the year 2020, guess what he's still doing? Sinners come in. Join the club. Join the family. His message never changes. Now next week, we're going to see another challenge. It's also going to be in Joshua. Because what happens is, even when we're doing what God says, we don't always see it ahead of time. Dear Lord, I ask that you would be with us today. As we leave your house, we ask that you would allow us to make this community our Jericho. Because, Lord, we believe that this promised land, you need to break down the evils in this community. Lord, we're not going to stand on a street corner holding up signs for all the moral failures of Mercer County. We're going to ask you to come through Mercer County. And we're going to ask you that if we need to walk around this town and this county and pray for it, we're going to do that. But Lord, before we can do that, we ask that you would do it in our individual hearts. Let us know that you are giving us the city, the community of corner of Hopewell Township. the block across the street in Ewing, the block across the street in Lawrence. Lord, the community within a half mile of us, the community on YouTube, we ask this in your holy and precious name. And everybody together said,